week that you'll be able to work on this essay. Some of you will finish the essay by end of class on Friday. Some of you won't. If you don't, you'll have over the weekend, which does include Monday night, to finish the essay. But we'll kind of talk about how the grading is going to work and all that stuff. This is actually going to go in as a double grade. It's going to be an essay and a quiz grade, and I'll explain how those things are going to work. But that'll be something that we're looking at more so, probably tomorrow really than today. So hold on to this sheet. Keep it like, front and center in your notebook, so that when we're referring to it tomorrow, you know exactly what it is that we're talking about. We are not treating this as like a take-home essay where you're going to be writing 1,300 words or anything for it. The length would probably fall more in the range of what you would do on a TWA. Maybe a little bit longer since there's 3 body paragraphs, but we're not turning this into a Josh Begler 9-page special about stuff. Okay. But that being said, let's take a look at the prompt. That's not it. That is a CHS argumentation syllabus. Whew, good times. I did not like having second period planned today. It was like, okay, 1 class. Now I'm not doing anything.
Hey, just give me a pass. I have study hall to come up every day.
Oh, that's okay.
Jesse and I have study hall.
Yes.
Yeah. Notice that new blue hole. Emma, you didn't sign out.
You have to sign up in this class.
All right, so passage below we have is coming. So this is an excerpt from Last Child in the Woods, written by Richard. Say move.
I just mean loud.
Loud.
Yeah, I don't think
Loud. Go move. Read the passage carefully, as opposed to haphazardly. Then, in an underdeveloped essay, analyze the rhetorical strategies Lou uses to develop his argument about the separation between people and nature. Support your analysis with specific references to the text. So, clearly, key words that are popping up, and we were looking at some of these last week with the Koch letter or the Magnasols. You see rhetorical strategies. You also see the term analysis, so we know we have rhetorical analysis. From an argument standpoint, what do we know that he is writing about, or at least developing a position about, and so therefore we're going to have to look at it as well. We're taking a look at something dealing with the separation between people and nature. We don't know what his stance is about that separation between people and nature, but we know it's going to be something that's going to at least deal with that. Keep in mind, as we are reading this, that it's not a D or Q. You're not writing about whether or not you agree with his opinion about the separation between people and nature, but we are going to analyze the devices he uses to develop his argument. So I was getting a sense with first period, and it doesn't mean you're going to feel the same way, that some people are going, yeah, I think he's right, and here are the devices, and other folks are going, no. This is an old baby boomer who's out of touch with reality. This idea is stupid. That doesn't matter because your job is simply to identify the techniques that he uses to develop that position. And that's sometimes kind of a tough thing to keep in mind. You might disagree with what a person's writing about, but it might not matter based on what that essay is. Researchers at the State University of New York at Buffalo are experimenting with genetic technology through which they can choose the colors that appear on butterfly wings. The announcement of this in 2002 led writer Matt Richtel to conjure a brave new advertising medium. There are countless possibilities for moving ads out of the virtual world and into the real one. Sponsorship-wise, it's time for nature to carry its weight. Advertisers already stamp their messages into the wet sands of public beaches. Cash-strapped municipalities, corporations agree to affix their company logo on parks in exchange for dollars to keep the public spaces maintained. The sheer popularity of simulating nature or using nature as ad space demands that we acknowledge, even respect, their cultural importance, suggests Richtel. Culturally important, yes. But the logical extension of synthetic nature is the irrelevance of true nature, the certainty that it's not even worth looking at. Any initial reactions, whether it be device-wise, argument-wise, or just reactions to the first paragraph? Have you ever seen an advertisement on a butterfly? I have not.
I would like to. I would like to.
Why would you like to see an advertisement on a butterfly? I picture myself at Phipps, and a butterfly goes by, and I have to scan the QR code to get my coupons, for.
I don't understand like advertising on a butterfly that you could read.
Oh, why you would
Yeah, it'd have to be still.
I like the idea that
Well, yeah, and I mean, and obviously the argument is not solely going to be about how advertisement can work, sponsorship wise and things like that. I guess you could see situations where, before the Steeler playoff game, all the black and gold butterflies start, flying around. Not that there would be butterflies in January, but who knows? Or if to sell tickets, the Pirates, it's always a struggle, are celebrating National Heritage Day for Lithuanians at PNC Park. You have Lithuanian colored butterflies, flying around. Yeah, it'd be hard to get that UPC code or QR code and get it stamped on there. Would it shock you to see red and gold butterflies flying around the McDonald's?
a McDonald's, yeah.
That would be awesome.
Not the
Well,
butterfly.
would it surprise you to see McDonald's try to use, let me put it that way, red and gold butterflies, flying around them? Really, probably not. Graduation ceremonies, class of 20. What are you guys going to be? You're going to be 2020. Red and white butterflies flying all around Margarelli Stadium.
No.
So we're certainly dealing with the whole idea here about sponsorship advertising, at least in this paragraph, just kind of making little notes as to what's happening. Not meaning that you're necessarily going to write about it or that it is going to pertain between the separation between people and nature. Do you notice anything from a literary device rhetorical strategy standpoint within that first paragraph?
When he says a brave new advertising medium, is that supposed to be like kind of brave new world?
I don't know if that was his intent. I almost have to catch myself to keep myself from saying Brave New World, probably because it's just ingrained in minds that most of you in 10th grade read Brave New World. For those who read 1984, we kind of talk about Brave New World sometimes within essays and journals, and we talked about it earlier. So it certainly would be a possibility. Where'd the line go? Right here, line 5. So yeah, there could be maybe a little bit of an illusion taking place with it. And you're certainly talking about futuristic, which would align with Brave New World. If Brave New World were about Columbus, coming to the New World, I don't think that would quite match up the same way that we think of manipulation of genetics, science, future dystopia. So yeah, that certainly would be a possibility. If it's unintended, I would have a hard time seeing an AP reader hold it against you, so long as you explain how that illusion would be relevant. Anything else? There's another line for me, or a couple words, and I don't know if I will write about it, but I think it's just interesting that those words get used next to one another toward the end of the paragraph. Yeah, synthetic nature. And then also kind of taking a look at the irrelevance of true nature, with synthetic, unnatural, nature, natural. Those two things certainly contrast one another. I could see people describing it as ironic. I could see people identifying juxtaposition. I could see people maybe even going it's an oxymoron or it's oxymoronic language, at the very least. I'll put irony down just because I think that's the easiest one to write. But I could see other folks maybe kind of using some other things. I do think you get this idea about this irrelevance of true nature as maybe being a potential idea that he's really going to focus on. What's the problem between or how does the separation between people and nature begin? When people no longer look at nature as being anything worth of importance, that's how the separation can kind of start to take place. True, our experience as a natural landscape, quote, often occurs within an automobile looking out, as Elaine Brooks said. But now, even that visual connection is optional. A friend of mine was shopping for a new luxury car to celebrate her half-century of survival in the material world. Happy 50th birthday. That's something I would say to my mom. Congratulations on your 3/4 of a century. I don't know if I would include the material world, but you know. Mrs. Kane, you have one more year in this decade, and then it's time for a new one. That'll be depressing next year. She settled on a Mercedes SUV. It's tough when you have to settle on a Mercedes. You know, Grant, like, I guess I'll settle for a Mercedes. With a global positioning system, or GPS. Just tap in your destination, the vehicle not only provides a map on the dashboard screen, but talks you there. But she knew where to draw the line. The salesman's jaw dropped when I said I didn't want a backseat television monitor for my daughter, she told me. He almost refused to let me leave the dealership until he could understand why. Rear seat and in-dash multimedia entertainment products, as they are called, are quickly becoming the hottest add-on since rear-view mirror fuzzy dice. The target market, parents who will pay a premium for a little backseat piece. Sales are brisk, the prices are falling. Some systems include wireless infrared connected headsets. The children can watch Sesame Street or play Grand Theft Auto on their PlayStation without bothering the driver.
In the car.
What?
Is
Why
the
are you
PlayStation
laughing?
going to be in the car?
What kind of you can't
There's no way
Sesame
you
Street to Grand Theft Auto is just a weird
You
jump.
can't set up
Okay.
a PlayStation in a car. You go
I mean, I
with
think
a
that was the
bus,
point,
and
it's
this
like
driver
the
wouldn't be able to handle
juxtaposition.
it. I mean,
So, one thing, and again, does this mean that Heath would write about it? Who knows? But once you start chuckling, where again you see a pretty big jump from Sesame Street to GTA, that lets you know that this might be something that I kind of take a look at. The main issue that he's looking at, or at least that he's using this story from Elaine Brooks about, would be what do kids now do in the car? Watch TV. In all fairness, we got a new vehicle a little over a month ago. Our previous vehicle, sad to say, did have a rear DVD player. So the kids could put in a DVD player. They could hook up. We did a GameCube. That didn't take too many amps.
I love that.
So they could have their GameCube and then they could play Mario Kart. We did it once.
GameCube
Never-
at the
never
time
again.
hasn't handled
But we did it once. And they could listen to the radio in their own with their headphones, and then we could have our own radio station going, which was, actually kind of nice. Vehicle that we just got, obviously, like anything else, costs more money. Kids were upset about two things: no rear seat heated seats, which they did not have anyway, but they were in this fantasy world that they were going to have warm butts sitting in the back seat.
Those are so nice.
They are.
My dad.
And apparently, in one of the trim lines we could have had it. There was no way we were going up to that trim line.
I mean, like the front.
They also do not have the rear DVD player. I don't think they had a car on the lot that had a rear DVD player for the vehicle that we were looking at, regardless of the trim line, because it's not as popular anymore. Because now you have your portable Nintendo Switches, and people can watch something on a Kindle or phone or iPad or things like that. There are more USB chargers in that car than I have ever seen in any, cubicle or things like that. So yeah, that's convenient. The third row that you hardly ever sit in, there's like 4 of them back there. So come aboard, you can charge your device while we're in the car. We've
Did you
had,
set up for a Mercedes?
no, we've had Chevy Traverses for the last. So the detail that maybe she mentions, Brooks, and Lou writes about, might not be quite as accurate anymore in 2018, but the idea of still focusing on a screen as opposed to looking out your window, yeah, that would be something. And we went to Harrisburg this weekend to go see Mrs. Kane's family. The girls know that when we're headed out, once we go through the tunnel by Somerset on the Turnpike, that's when their little DVD players can come out. That's when the Kindle can come out. That's when they're allowed to start watching things. We don't let them just watch all the time. Like if we're going to be going to the grocery store or whatever, no, you're not going to be watching movies and things like that. But yeah, they know that that's something that they can do. Conversely, growing up for me, maybe even with you or currently, you had to look out the window. So we did look for roadkill. We did count cows, and then when you got to a cemetery, all your cows died, and whoever had the most cows at the end of the trip won. Could be something with mad libs. Yeah, cows in cemeteries. I know, and I detested this game, but my mom made me play the stupid sign bingo game. So that
we played the sign.
yeah, I was so annoying. But so if you went past the speed limit sign, that was one of the little boxes, and you put your check there. And then when you went past the pedestrian
we
thing,
played to find one with every letter in the alphabet.
yeah,
So you had to
ABC
help out.
game,
So that's
license plate games, we would certainly do. Or might have Hot Wheels or some Transformers, but you're playing, looking out the window. And of course, all of us will draw on the window at some point until the parent yells at you. You better watch that window when we get home. I'm sorry?
Will you just try to annoy your parents and whoever gets yelled at first?
We played the quiet game.
That sounds horrible.
Quiet game never works.
I always
I
thought
think it's really dumb how she's like, the salesman jaw dropped.
Yeah, she's
whenever she
definitely
found
like
out-
exaggerating.
Well, but even so, he's like, he wouldn't let me leave the lot without telling him why. That's because he's a salesman and he wants her to spend more money and to buy it. Like,
I don't-
like, oh my gosh, you don't want
This is
one?
pretty.
I mean,
He's
you could
have to
you
have it.
you could certainly take a look at the idea that there's some hyperbole, there's some exaggeration, taking place with it. I don't know if and I've never bought a Mercedes. I've never bought a BMW, high-end luxury SUV, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if there's the expectation that if you are going to get the Mercedes or you're going to get the Lexus or the Infiniti, that you are going to get front and rear heated seats, and you will get all the TV screens that drop down or show up in the headrest. That hey, if you're going to pay the money for the luxury item, you're going to go all out for it. There might be some kind of connection with that, but yeah, no, there wasn't when we were pulling out like you don't want the rear heated seats. Why? That wasn't an argument that ever kind of came up. Since we've mentioned some potential devices up here with irony or allusions to Brave New World, already said hyperbole, what about what is kind of happening in that paragraph as a whole? Any ideas for what you could use for that paragraph as a whole?
Could you say pathos?
I mean, is anecdote? That's
Well, what with pathos would you? Emotional appeal.
It was just like kind of an emotional appeal. Like, really, this is how our society is.
Okay. What
The society.
would you say? There's any specific lines or details that contribute to that pathos?
I think it's all the information beforehand as well. I think it's just like.
Well, and I think even like the whole idea about a friend of mine, or no, up above, where'd it go? Celebrating her half century of survival in the material world. Like I think that's maybe where that pathos kind of starts to come to fruition. Josh, you said, can I use anecdote? I mean, it's a story. Yes, to answer, you could use anecdote. So you could certainly argue that the two kind of go together, that the anecdote is a little bit of an emotional appeal or plea as to have we really come to this point that we're this far, that the expectation is you have to have wireless headphones, movies, GPS, all that kind of stuff. GPS is becoming less and less common in cars because now, because you can do Apple CarPlay or Android Auto where, the phone is basically becoming the GPS. The map now. And Heath, you kind of mentioned this split, this dichotomy between Sesame Street, Grand Theft Auto. That might be something that we come back to, that is a pretty big leap that is taking place. What it could also is, of the two, I think Sesame Street would be the more traditional, wholesome form of entertainment would be the argument out there. Grand Theft Auto, maybe a little more edgy and risque for the car, but
The sirens would really
What does it do by mentioning both of those? You include the people who you would picture as having more traditional forms of classic entertainment, as well as PlayStation, Grand Theft Auto, Super Smash Brothers, whatever kind of game you want to throw in there. So whoever you're talking about, whether it be the baby boomers who love Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, or what's your current generation? Your Z Gen or something?
Yeah,
Gen Z, Generation X. That's back in my day.
Are we?
It spawns those generations. And it's just not just one group of people that it would apply to. Why do so many Americans say they want their children to watch less TV, yet continue to expand opportunities for them to watch it? More importantly, why do so many people no longer consider the physical world worth watching? What just happened in those two sentences? Syntactically. You have rhetorical questions. The highway's edges may not be postcard perfect, but for a century, children's early understanding of how cities and nature fit together was gained from the backseat. The empty farmhouse at the edge of the subdivision, the variety of architecture here and there, the woods and fields and water beyond the seamy edges, all that was and is still available to the eye. This was the landscape that we watched as children. It was our drive-by movie.
So much.
Like, I agree, but I also hate this guy.
Wait, I have a question.
Yep.
I agree with this.
What
Like
does the first paragraph have to do with humane?
stuff that is like.
Good question. And if Jesse, and if you didn't hear, Amira's question was, what does the first paragraph have to do with this? Because there is definitely a divide that's happening here where we're talking about sponsorship and advertising, and now it all seems to kind of go to this entertainment thing, and really it's going to kind of continue on for the rest of the paragraph. Any thoughts to that? Because I think it's a valid point.
Well, I mean, I think the whole purpose of the first paragraph is that's pretty much leading you into the whole argument that in this day and age, most people don't really think that it's worth actually paying attention to nature. And then as we get into the second half here, that's showing it in that during car rides, no one is even paying attention to what's outside the car. No one is.
And if you take that idea kind of within an essay structure, I would say that the sponsorship, the advertising thing is almost kind of like an attention grabber. This is to kind of pull you in. The thesis, if anything, would end up being this idea here. The logical extension of synthetic nature is the irrelevance of true nature. I would say that is the main point that he's really trying to drive home. And now he's going to be using the entertainment, the technology as his basis for it. But if we were to say that he's writing an article, and this is coming within a book, about the significance of sponsorship and advertising, we're probably missing the big picture with it. So he kind of pulls us in with the idea that, hey, nature's not good enough for us. Sometimes we get excited when we have the ability to manipulate it. And why would we need to manipulate something? Well, because true nature really isn't relevant enough for us. So we have to find some other kind of substitutions that go along with it. I think most of your examples that you would end up pulling from a rhetorical strategy would probably be from line 20 on. The idea down here about synthetic, irrelevance of true nature, that certainly would be a main thing that I could see a lot of folks looking at. But I bet more so this stuff would probably get used. Emma talked about Brave New World, maybe illusion. She might still be able to write about it, but might feel that doesn't really fit in quite as well with the other examples that you're looking at. Rhetorical questions is not something that we've really used before as a device, because we don't come across them too often. Why do you pose rhetorical questions? Yeah. And so, why does he go about using these devices? Or use these questions? Because he does want the reader to kind of start thinking about, do we watch too much TV? Or are we more worried about our own creative imaginary world on the telescreen as opposed to what would be going on in the world around it? I'd say you have a lot of syntactical things that you could use here in these closing paragraphs. Rhetorical questions would certainly count. You probably start to notice here that there is some parallel structure that takes place so far as, you know, the was gained from the back seat, the empty farmhouse at the edge of the subdivision, the variety of architecture, the woods and fields. You have some parallelism going on there. You could certainly argue that imagery is starting to also take place. And it was our drive-by movie. It's a simple little metaphor. Perhaps we'll someday tell our grandchildren stories about our version of the 19th century Conestoga wagon. You did what? They'll ask. Yes, we'll say. It's true. We actually looked out the car window. Hold your breath, Megan. I know, it's a lot to digest. In our useful boredom, which that, you know, you kind of have this little contradictory statement with synthetic nature. Useful boredom, you can kind of argue, does that too. We used our fingers to draw pictures on fog glass as we watched telephone poles tick by. We saw birds on the wires and combines in the fields. We were fascinated with roadkill, and we counted cows and horses and coyotes and shaving cream signs. We stared with a kind of reverence at the horizon as thunderheads and dancing rain moved with us. We held our little plastic cars against the glass and pretended that they too were racing towards some unknown destination. We considered the past and dreamed of the future and watched it all go by in the blink of an eye. And Jesse still can't stand this guy.
That's so great. I like it. Made me want to.
Yeah, again, in Afro, the parallelism, parallel structure, you know, again, you have a lot of that kind of syntactical stuff. You also could take a look, when we talk about syntax, generally we do focus on the repetition that would be taking place, which we have here with we. You also might take a look at the way that emphasis gets used with the italics. You know, you did what? Yes. We looked out the car window. Oh my goodness. What would you say, going back up to the top, is his argument about the separation between people and nature? Because that's going to drive, pun intended, what your devices are probably going to be.
Like the people have become separated with nature.
Or we've allowed ourselves to become, you know, but yeah, and I think it's good, the sense is pretty clear that he has a negative viewpoint about that separation. Again, you're not going to go, he unjustly uses these devices for his terrible argument, or he correctly asserts, but he's trying to emphasize that this divide is taking place by using, you know, pathos, anecdote, parallel structure, or whatever the case may be. So the idea as to, he's trying to emphasize this divide that has occurred, those would be the devices that you would want to start to kind of take a look at. As I said, we are going to turn this into an essay. You're going to choose 3 rhetorical devices. You can choose from the ones that we have kind of mentioned. You might pick up on some other things as well. It's not going to be you come in tomorrow like, okay, get going, good luck. Tomorrow we're going to set some things up with you on Revision Assistant, make sure all your accounts work. I'll kind of explain in more detail about how the structure works and why we're doing it. It's on the back of the sheet. So have this paper with you tomorrow for sure. Otherwise, between now and Tuesday, reading starter. It comes to life. Suffering one day at a time.
Sickness, like you're suffering from your sickness, and like you must.
Sam was upset, argumentation was that second period. He specifically said that he delivered stuff.
I